Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending our webinar. I know we've been doing a series here. We've got another great one coming up next week, and we've been doing these weekly. So if there's any that you missed that you might be interested in, we'll be posting them, or you can shoot us an email, and we can get those recordings set up and sent out for you to check on them. But we wanted to continue to provide you with as much information and guidance as we can throughout this time. For those of you that are in, around Florida, you've seen the state start to open back up. South Florida, it's been maybe a little bit slower, but it's really getting there. We're in Delray Beach, and I actually live in Miami, so I've seen quite a few businesses even down there start to open back up. So hopefully we are getting back to somewhat of a normal environment. But in the meantime, I think we've all had an opportunity to reflect on this time and see it as hopefully a moment to take control and see some opportunities here and prepare for the next time. And I'm sure we're all expecting a next time. Hopefully nothing is bad and nothing is serious, but so it's always good to be prepared, have a plan, and work that plan. So I'm just going to go through today, in about 10 questions that we've seen quite frequently come through our office. I thought it would be helpful, to think about, during this time and for future time and stuff to, just think about how you can, be prepared, right? How you can turn this challenge into an opportunity. I've also just, before I get started, I put my email address here in the chat. So if you open that up, you can see it. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I'm not going to take any questions through here, but just send me an email and I'd be more than happy to answer that question as best I can, or at least put you on the right path. So as I said, top 10 questions that clients have been asking during COVID-19. First, as a non-essential business, how do I survive? Or as a business that, maybe you're essential, but you're limited as to what you can do. What can you do before shutdown occurs and before you have to close your doors? And whether this is in regards to COVID-19 or a natural disaster, even, I think it's all going to it's all going to apply. And first and foremost, I'd say find a way to make yourself essential. If you want to open your doors and keep your doors open, find a way to serve your community in different ways. Expand your book, your bag, what you can do, obviously within the limits of scope of your license. But if you can offer certain services that are maybe more essential, then that's an opportunity to keep yourself open, at least in a brick and mortar store. But also, I would consider, how to prepare for work from home options. So can you take the time to develop work from home protocols and policies? Can you take the time to, integrate and implement telehealth type services and get your staff used to it, get your patient base used to it, and find a way to be comfortable with these types of situations where you're working from home, you're working on a screen, you're comfortable with it, your staff knows what to do, your staff knows what's expected, and your patients are comfortable with it and can feel as though that they're being treated in a time where they may be stuck at home. I'd also advise you to, look over your emergency plans, or if you don't have one, implement one, come up with one, get with your advisors, and make sure that, in the event of an emergency or pandemic like this, you've got everything in place and you know where people are going to be, what they're going to be doing, how they're going to be doing it, funding options, financing options. And then when the time actually comes, you use that downtime to review your plans and policies, review employment contracts, look at your lease, look at, vendor contracts, see if there's any way to squeeze as much out of those as possible, whether it's time for renewal or just an opportunity to renegotiate, prices and fees. So try to make yourself essential, or at least do your best to put a plan in place so you can operate, at least on a limited basis, for some type of shutdown, as we've experienced here. We've had a lot of questions on telehealth, and the next few slides will be about telehealth. Specifically, this one is, on billing. And what I've advised is, if you're, not taking any insurance and it's elective and people are paying cash, create some sort of fee schedule. Be clear and transparent on what the cost is going to be for your telehealth services, whether it's consults or follow-ups, or treatments. Set up, a fee schedule, make it clear, make sure your patients have it, and then also set up, authorization forms for billing, and different policies, right? So this is how we bill. We require a credit card, or we've got our vendor in place for processing, and what policies you're going to have in place when it comes to billing and collections and things of that nature. Make sure you have a method to take payment, safely, and also, that may be compliant with HIPAA. On the insurance-based side, during this COVID-19 pandemic, CMS provided a lot of waivers. They've provided a list of services that are eligible for reimbursement. They've even included, codes and different fees for all of that. I think most importantly, and then this probably isn't going to stay in place, but at least for the time being, it's there. They've waived a lot of restrictions, and they lifted a lot of sort of regulations on this. They're allowing payments for office visits, for preventative screenings through telehealth, and they've also provided that you can waive copays without penalties and risk of enforcement, and you can supervise mid-level providers through telehealth and get paid that way. So while some of that may change, I would at least advise that whether you're taking insurance or not, you set up your fee schedules, you set up billing authorizations and practices, and policies that are going to relate to billing and collection as it pertains to telehealth. Are telehealth documentation requirements going to be the same as in person? I would say at a minimum, yes. And I would go even further to make sure that you're being extra detailed, when it comes to documenting telehealth encounters. You want to, record adequate notes. You want to make sure that you're maintaining these notes as if you're, seeing and treating the patient in person. These notes and documentation still must be HIPAA compliant, whether you're using your own system or whether you're using an integrated, telehealth system, and they provide note-taking capability. But just document, and be clear that anytime you provide a treatment, you've written or you've noted that it's through telehealth services. What devices you were using, and quality of internet connection. Make sure that the patient was aware that you're using telehealth, and that you made them aware of alternatives and limitations, and document all these things. Document any concerns that they may have, in regards to the use of telehealth. If they're not allowed to come in because of county, city, state restrictions, then that's really their only option, other than not being treated that way. But you still should make them aware of that, and you still should document that you've made them aware of that, and especially that there's significant limitations in what you can and can't do. Telehealth consent forms. Absolutely, you should have consent forms in place for telehealth, whether it's during a pandemic or regular everyday practice, just something that you might add and open up to patients. You want these to be incredibly clear that there are significant limitations um, outside of a pandemic, that there may be other options and alternative methods of treatment, that those patients are allowed, to seek other methods of treatment, meaning in person, and they're not only limited to telehealth. But you really want it to be clear that telehealth is not a replacement for in person. It's going to have limitations, and it's certainly not a replacement for any sort of emergency situations. You want the patients to read that, to be aware of it, to sign to that, and say, hey, if something does go wrong, you know exactly what you signed up for and what we're capable of doing, and we couldn't do more than that. Our biggest concern with telehealth is liability if you miss something, or standard of care. It's going to be a little bit harder to treat a person through a video and through audio when you can't physically examine. So you never want to put yourself in a position where a patient can say that you didn't do what you were supposed to do. But if you can at least let them know ahead of time and have them be aware of that in writing, we think that goes a long way to providing better service and covering yourself. Are restrictive covenants still enforceable during COVID-19 and maybe other pandemics where mass businesses are shut down or put on hold? Most likely, yes. There's been nothing that any state or local government has said where a restrictive covenant in a contract is going to be null and void. The biggest thing you want to look for, whether you're the employer terminating somebody or whether you're going to be hiring somebody that was terminated and has a restrictive covenant, is was that person terminated in a wrongful manner or in a breach of their contract? And it's really a case-by-case basis. If you're hiring someone who was fired and has a restrictive covenant, you'd certainly want to look at the contract that they have. You'd want to get all the details surrounding the termination. Maybe they were terminated, perfectly within the contract, and that restrictive covenant is, pretty likely going to be enforceable still. It's just a matter of whether that former employer wants to enforce it or can enforce it, and how backed up a court system is going to be. And I'm sure we're going to see a huge uptick in litigation in regards to COVID-related employment disputes and terminations, negligence, et cetera. So be careful. Make sure you review everything you can prior to, but know that restrictive covenants, whether you're firing or whether you're hiring someone with one, they're most likely still going to be enforceable. It's just a matter of whether or not someone can or will pursue it at that point. Does HIPAA still apply in regards to COVID-19? Yes, HIPAA is going to still apply, but we've seen a statements and lax enforcement during this pandemic. Every situation is going to be different, obviously. In this case, we've seen guidance that says if a breach occurred in good faith, then a covered provider most likely isn't going to face any sort of enforcement. But you still have to notify, all the appropriate parties if there is a breach. Now, if you've got someone, whether it's a patient or an employee, and you find out that they've tested positive for COVID-19, what do you do in that case? Can you let everybody know that this person in your office tested positive? Well, you want to be very careful, but I would also advise that you need to let people know that have potentially been exposed, and you want to let them know in the least amount of terms as possible. Hey, there was a patient here, or hey, there was a staff member that's tested positive. You may have been in the office at that time, and you had no direct contact with them, or you might have had direct contact with them. So be very careful about it. Talk to the person that maybe is tested positive. Talk to them first before going through it. Let them know that you're most likely under a duty to inform people. You as an employer would need to provide a safe workplace and safe work environments environment. If you're an employee of a company, I would take it to the managers or the employers and let them know. But with something that's highly contagious as this, a failure to notify these people might lead to either unsafe workplace issues. It could obviously lead to severe health issues, and that could just take you down a path of unwanted legal issues and concerns and problems. So I think best case is definitely try to notify, but do it in a very safe and limited manner. Payroll protection program. So if you were some of the lucky few that needed it, well, not lucky few that needed it, but lucky few that got it, now you're wondering how do you use it without having to repay it. So basically, these payroll protection programs, and there was a number of different funding options out there, whether it was economic disaster relief, the CARES Act, et cetera. The government tried to pump out as much money as possible for different purposes, and did it in such a fast manner that maybe it didn't accomplish its goal, but some people got it, and I think it definitely helped some people, keep the ship afloat. So if you got it, you can use it for payroll, employee benefits, rent or mortgage payments, utilities, but you can't use it for 1099 contractors. You can only use it for W-2 employees if you're an employer. And if you're an employer and you laid somebody off, you don't necessarily have to hire that person back, but you can use that money that you received through these grant programs to hire a new employee that fills the same position. But what happens if you don't need all the money, you don't use all the money, or use it for those specific expenses? Well, you're going to have to pay it back then. You can either pay it back in a lump sum, or you can pay it back over time, but at an interest rate of 1%. The terms on that maybe aren't as well laid out, but I think the goal for the government was to get as much money out and kind of have a kicker there to say, hey, if you don't use it for what it's supposed to, then we're going to come back. We're going to come after it. But we're not really sure how intensely they will do that at this point, and I don't think they are either. Another big question I've had, and I work with a lot of medical spas and businesses that aren't maybe a traditional practice, but they've got clients who want certain products, and I'll use a medical spa in this case where they're doing skin consults and face care and skincare regimens and things like that, and the client's wondering, well, hey, where can I get the products that I normally buy in store? Can I buy them online, or I can't? So what can I do? So can you, as the business owner or practice, ship products to clients? Well, if it's a non-prescription and a non-controlled substance, then yes, you can do that. You can send it to them. You can send it just via mail. Make sure that you've got it documented that you've got products, you're selling it, and this is what you're doing it for. That's totally fine. When it comes to prescription samples, you can send samples, but you can't charge patients for samples. So if you happen to have something that's prescription, it's a sample, and you want to send it to a client, you can do that, but you can't charge them for that. You may be able to charge for a consult or your telehealth visit, but not more than that, not for the product or the sample itself. If you're dealing with controlled substances, I would say, let's talk about that on a case-by-case basis. That's going to be a little bit more detailed and involved. But in general, if you've got products, creams, lotions, whatever, non-prescription, non-controlled, you're pretty much free to do it. Anything with samples you can do, just don't sell them. So you may have an essential practice and you've stayed open, or now we're seeing the state open more, and you're part of phase one, and you're allowed to open, but at limited capacity. So how can you operate safely? And by operate safely, that means I think health and safety wise, that means, legally, how do you avoid, any issues from employees or staff, or patients even. So, you know, what we would advise first is, find other similar companies or businesses, maybe in your area, and see what they're doing. You're likely going to be held to the same standards as similarly situated companies and businesses. And so that's sort of the first thing. See how they're operating. If it looks totally out of whack, don't follow it. But if it seems safe and restrictive, then that's a good place to start. I would then document, the decisions that you're going to make, whether it's policies and procedures, or why you're opening or the hours that you're opening. Just keep a log of making these decisions, and then be very open and communicate these practices with employees, staff, and patients and clients coming in. Once you do, get to a point where you're ready to open your doors, you want to make sure that you're still complying with, any state or local government restrictions or guidelines, and any federal ones as well, to the extent that it's going to apply, whether it's, OSHA or, just health board, CDC, et cetera. So, still implement and enforce social distancing as necessary. Provide, written advice to any employees in regards to, workplace safety, washing hands, disposing of masks and gloves, et cetera. Make sure you advise, don't share technology, whether that's keyboards or iPads, touch screens, et cetera. Make sure that, proper protective equipment's being worn, when it's being worn, how it's being worn, regularly cleaning office surfaces between patients, after using the bathroom even, et cetera. And then also just, if they're not feeling well, fever, coughing, similar symptoms, don't force them to come to work. Let them know, hey, don't come to work if this happens, because if you're potentially positive for COVID-19, we don't want you to come in here and, one, be sick and have to try to work, but two, get anybody else sick and, blow this thing back up. So, open up or have other policies too about, limiting the number of people, whether it's in a room or during breaks, et cetera. Stagger, work hours and break if you can. And maybe even limit, the common areas, whether it's, office kitchens, things like that. Try to make things as disposable as possible and, as separate as possible for the time being. We've also had a question about, employers taking employees' temperatures and asking them questions about basically their health before letting them back into the office. And this may go for patients as well. I think this is obviously a good idea because you want to do your part to prevent, a large outbreak. But there's employment laws, and then there's going to be some HIPAA privacy laws that are going to come into place also. So, if you are an employer, or if you're an employee and your employer wants to take your temperature, well, it's probably going to be considered a medical record. They're going to maybe make note of that. And they're going to have to protect, that as far as privacy goes. Consider how deep and how big of a health record you're going to be keeping of your employees. You're going to want to keep a log, I'm sure, of if someone's getting, temperature tested, every shift or whatever it may be. But be careful with, the types of questions you're asking. Be careful with, having anybody that's got COVID-19 symptoms coming back in. Just be cautious. Be careful. Don't ask more than you need to. Do what's, only do what is recommended by, local authorities as far as bringing people back in, because that's the best way to say that, hey, I just followed the advice of the government, the law, et cetera. And didn't go too far. But if you're taking employees' temperatures or even patient temperatures, those are going to be health records, and you're going to have to, protect those. And the last big question we've had is, well, what can I do for next time? So I wish I had, these answers a few months ago, and we could have prepared everybody, but that's what happens in these emergency situations is things pop up, and you've got to adapt. So I would say use this situation as a basis. I think we've seen a lot of it, if not all of it, during this. Businesses shutting down, quarantines, lack of supplies, etc. And a lot of people have had to scramble to adapt during this time. So, review those emergency plans that we talked about. Make sure that they're, as comprehensive as they can be. Put in place and review any work from home protocols and policies or the technologies that you need. Adapt now. If you don't need to come back to the office yet, you can start to, work on those those systems and policies and procedures at this point. Consider reduced staffing options in situations where there's emergency or whether it's natural disaster or something similar to COVID-19. And telehealth, as much as you can, integrate that and bring it to your patients and get your staff used to it. It's as simple as having a plan and then sticking to that plan when something happens. But unfortunately, when something uncertain comes up, there's not always a plan for that. So be open to change, be open to adaptation, and work it. Have a good team of advisors around to reach out to, and I think that's the best way to be prepared for future scenarios. So that's all we've got today here. Thanks again for coming in. I know it's been a tough time, and I hope you got some good bits here. As I mentioned, I put my email address in the chat. It's also here on this last slide. If you have any questions about this or anything else, whether it's reopening or payment protection, payroll protection program, or anything related to this, feel free to reach out. Happy to answer your questions as best we can, or at least get you on the right path. But we're looking forward to phase one getting more fully implemented and getting back to a more regular schedule and life, and hopefully this is the last of it. So thanks again. Appreciate it. We're happy to have you guys, and we're happy to share as much information as we can.